Just sign it, Mom. You wouldn't understand it anyway. Michael shoved the pen into my hand like I was a nuisance disrupting his grand plan. I froze. On the kitchen counter lay a thick stack of papers bound neatly in a leather folder. Chloe stood beside him, arms crossed, glancing at the clock, like she had somewhere more important to be. The room was dead silent, even though sunlight still poured in through the windows. I didn't sign. I looked at my son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, who scraped his knees learning to ride a bike, who cried into my chest the day his father died. Now he couldn't even meet my eyes, like I was a stranger in his house. "It's just to protect your assets," Michael said, soft but firm. "All standard paperwork. Just sign it, okay?" My name is Lillian Hayes. I'm 68, a widow, a former school librarian. I lived most of my life in Warwick, Rhode Island. After Arthur, my husband, died of cancer 4 years ago, the house we built together became too big, too quiet, too filled with echoes. I was afraid of the silence, afraid of falling in the bathroom and no one knowing, afraid of being forgotten. So when Michael said, "Come live with us, Mom. Be close to the kids. You won't be alone," I believed him. I sold the house, packed decades of memories into cardboard boxes, moved into the ground floor apartment they called Mom's place. At first, it felt warm. They invited me to dinner. The kids knocked on my door. But slowly it all changed. Fewer invitations, quiet dinners without me, closed doors, eyes that no longer looked mine in the eye. And today, this, a stack of legal papers. No explanation, no questions, just an expectation, sign. I asked, "Can I read it first?" Michael sighed, long and heavy. The kind of sigh you give when someone ruins a perfectly laid out deal. "You don't need to, Mom. It's all standard. I've handled everything." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in that freshly painted room, surrounded by furniture that wasn't mine, staring at the ceiling. I didn't cry, but I felt something break, not loudly, quietly, like a thread snapping deep inside. I wasn't being protected. I was being erased, pushed aside, treated like a signature, not a person. The next morning, I called Diane, Arthur's old friend, a real estate attorney I hadn't spoken to in years. I felt guilty for not trusting my own son, but a small voice in me whispered, "If it's all clean, then no one should fear a second opinion." After hanging up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. The same spot where Michael had pushed the pen into my hand. It was still lying there, silent, like me, and I realized something. If I signed, I surrendered. If I refused, I was choosing to fight. And I've never been one to give up without a fight. I used to think I was prepared for old age. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I had memories, I had principles, I had 2 good children. And I had a husband who once loved me with every breath he had. Arthur died on a bitter winter morning. He held my hand until the very end, his eyes dimming but still gentle. "You have to keep living, Lil," he whispered, "for both of us." And I did. I went back to the 2-story house where we'd raised Michael and Stephanie. I tried to keep things normal, woke up at 6, made breakfast, watered the plants. But when the seat across from me at the table stayed empty, when the sound of the TV became just a band-aid for silence, I started to feel afraid. That house had once been a home. Now it felt like a vault of echoes. Every night, walking past our old bedroom, there was a hollowness that settled deep in my bones. Then one day, I slipped in the bathroom. Nothing serious, just a fall. But lying there on the cold tile, soaked and unseen, something inside me shifted. I began to think about selling the house. Stephanie called every week from Connecticut. She was busy, always juggling clients and deadlines. Michael lived less than an hour away. One afternoon, he invited me out for lunch. "I've been thinking," he said, over soup and sandwiches. "You should move in with us, Mom. We've got the space. You'll be close to the kids. No more being alone." Chloe and I talked it over. "I didn't say anything," he added. "Please don't think of it as a burden. We want you with us. You deserve to rest now." I spent weeks thinking about it. I spoke to my financial advisor, asked my sister's opinion. I didn't want to impose, but the truth was, I longed for someone. Not to take care of me, just to be there, so I wouldn't feel like I was slowly disappearing from the world. I said yes. I sold the house, packed my life into boxes, moved into the ground floor unit Michael and Chloe had custom made for Mom. It had a small kitchen, a private bathroom, a window facing the garden. On paper, it was perfect. And at first, it really was. We had family dinners. The kids told me about school. Chloe even bought a few things I loved. A pale blue teapot, vintage frames for old photos of Arthur. I felt grateful. I truly believed I'd made the right choice. But no one tells you that love, real love, can have an expiration date. The warmth began to fade. Not with yelling, but with silence. With doors that stopped being open. With dinners that happened without me. With glances that passed me by like I wasn't part of the conversation anymore. I told myself, they're just busy. I kept smiling, made tea, tidied up, held on to my routines like a lifeline, trying to prove I still had value, that I wasn't a burden. But slowly I began to wonder, did they still see me as family, or just a silent tenant living under their roof? I didn't know. All I knew was this. The moment Michael said, "You don't need to understand, just sign," I stopped being his mother. Things don't fall apart in a single day. They start with small changes, very small. So small, in fact, that if you told someone, they'd say you were overthinking it. It was just, Chloe stopped offering me tea after dinner. Michael began cutting conversations short, saying things like, "You should get some rest, Mom." The grandkids no longer ran into my room to tell me about school. I kept telling myself, "You're being sensitive. They're just busy." Maybe today was a long day. I still cooked when I could, cleaned my little kitchenette, watered the flowers by the porch. I still smiled when I heard the kids laugh. I still believed I was part of this home, or at least I tried to. But slowly I began to feel like a piece of furniture, neatly placed in the corner. Out of the way, not bothering anyone, not touched. One evening, Michael sat beside me with another stack of papers. Same gentle voice, same distant tone. "Mom, I've got a few more things for you to sign. It's about a family trust, just to help with taxes and protect your assets. Standard stuff." I looked at the documents. Thicker this time, more complicated, filled with legal terms I didn't fully understand. I waited for him to explain. He didn't. He just stared into his glass of water. Chloe stood behind him, that faint smile on her lips, but there was no warmth in it. Just expectation, like she already knew what I'd do. "You should just sign it. Makes everything easier," Michael said again, almost word for word, like before. "It's all standard." A chill crept down my spine. That exact phrasing. He'd used it before. Like it had been rehearsed, like I was watching a scene from an old play. This time I didn't sign. "I'll take a closer look first," I said. Michael's expression tightened. Chloe turned away. I went back to my room, sat in silence. Everything still looked perfect, clean, comfortable, well furnished. But it didn't feel like home anymore. I heard laughter upstairs, the kids, clinking dishes, soft chatter. But no one called for me. Not a single "Grandma, come join us." Not one "Mom, dinner's ready." I felt myself fading, not in some dramatic, loud way, but slowly, quietly, like someone was turning down the volume of my life one notch at a time. One day Stephanie came by. She was always gentle, but something was off that evening. She hugged me, stayed for dinner, but barely spoke. Occasionally she'd glance at Michael, then quickly look away. When she left, she hugged me tightly and said, "Take care of yourself, Mom." That was it. That night, I sat alone and realized not everything has to be spoken. The look in my daughter's eyes, her hesitation, the awkward gaps in conversation, all of it played like background music to a storm I hadn't quite seen coming. I started paying attention. I noticed Michael avoiding eye contact. Chloe no longer placed a hand on my shoulder. The kids had stopped calling me Grandma and started calling me Mrs. Lillian. Little things, tiny things, but real, and I knew. I couldn't keep pretending not to see them. I didn't sign, but I didn't say anything either. I just took the stack of papers back to my room. That night, I made a cup of tea, turned on my reading lamp, and began to go through them, page by page, line by line, as if I were untangling a knot, one wrong move, and I might strangle myself with it. I came across phrases like irrevocable trust, grantor, unlimited financial power of attorney. My eyes started to blur, not because of age, but because it felt like I was staring into a maze designed to confuse me on purpose. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough to know this was no standard form, no matter what Michael said. The next morning, I called Diane, Arthur's old friend and the only attorney I still trusted. We met at a small cafe 20 minutes from the house. I didn't want Chloe or Michael to know I was asking questions. Diane arrived, her hair grayer than before, but her eyes just as sharp. I handed her the documents Michael wanted me to sign. She read them in silence. The minutes felt like hours. Finally, she set the papers down and looked at me. "Lillian," she said gently, "if you sign these, you're giving them full legal control over your finances, immediately and irrevocably. You won't be able to undo it without their consent. You'll lose your financial independence, and worse, you may never get it back." I sat still. My chest felt tight, as if a hand was pressing against it. I gripped my coffee cup, but I couldn't bring it to my lips. I whispered, "Maybe Michael doesn't understand all this either. Maybe someone gave him bad advice." Diane gave me a look, soft but firm. "Lillian, most financial abuse starts with trust and ends in silence." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just nodded. I knew I had to stay calm. If I showed my hand too soon, they'd shut every door. I had to be smart, careful, clear. That night, I went home. I cooked a simple dinner. Smiled when I saw the kids. Let Michael think I hadn't done anything. But in my mind, I had already begun, recording everything. I took a small notebook and hid it inside a hardcover novel I kept on my shelf. Every night, I wrote down the time, the words Michael used, Chloe's tone, anything unusual. Once I walked past the kitchen and saw Michael talking to a man in a navy suit. When I entered, they both fell silent. Michael forced a smile and said, "Just a personal call." But the TV wasn't on. The room had been dead silent. The next morning, I found a crumpled business card in the trash. It was for an estate planning firm. Another time, I stepped out of my room and found that the hallway door connecting my suite to the rest of the house had been locked from the outside. I knocked. Michael opened it. "Oh, don't worry, Mom," he said quickly. "I was on a Zoom call." A Zoom call, but I knew the TV wasn't on, and the whole house had been quiet enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. This house was no longer what it once was. Everything still looked the same, but it wasn't peace I felt. It was the silence before a storm, and deep down I knew, if I didn't speak up, no one else ever would. I began to see everything differently, no longer as a mother who trusted too much, no longer as a woman afraid to ask questions. Now I lived like someone being hunted, and I had to learn how not to breathe too loudly. One afternoon, while cleaning a kitchen drawer, I found a yellow sticky note tucked beneath an old envelope. Michael's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. Follow up with Mom. Schedule with Mark call. Timeline transfer to bank. Review signature schedule. I held the note for a long time, not because I was shocked, but because I was heartbroken. I was no longer his mother. I was a checklist, a timeline, a goal to be achieved. After that day, I started quietly examining every inch of my room. And that's when I found the first one, a tiny black camera tucked into the ceiling corner near the overhead light, subtle, invisible to the untrained eye. But I used to be a librarian. I've spotted torn pages, misplaced commas, bent spines. I don't miss details. I pretended not to notice, kept moving as if nothing had changed, but now I knew I had no privacy. The next evening, I stepped into the backyard and pretended to water the plants. I looked up at the overhang near my window, and there it was, another camera, even smaller, aimed directly at my bedroom door. I took pictures. Then I went online and searched the model number. It was part of a home surveillance system. Features, live feed, audio enabled, remote mobile access. My stomach turned cold. I went back inside, sat down, and breathed, slowly, carefully. I couldn't panic. I couldn't give myself away. I needed more proof, more truth, more courage. For the first time in months, I stepped into Michael's office. The door wasn't locked. His laptop was open, resting in sleep mode. I sat down, tapped the keyboard, no password. The screen lit up, and there it was, the camera system dashboard. 5 live feeds, front porch, side walkway, hallway outside my suite, my private sitting room, and my kitchenette. I don't remember how long I stared at the screen. I just remember the sinking truth. Every moment of my private life had been watched. I didn't react. I didn't touch anything. I didn't unplug the cameras. But that night, I wrote down every camera angle, every timestamp I could recall, every detail. Another day, I quietly opened the bottom drawer beneath the printer. I found 2 folders. One labeled Lillian Medical, old health records, a medical directive I'd forgotten I signed. The other titled Trust Strategy, Final Draft. I opened it. It was a new will, unsigned. Michael listed as the sole executor. I felt my breath catch. On the margins, in Chloe's handwriting, a note scribbled next to a line. Remove Stephanie, risk of interference. Stephanie, my daughter, the one who always held my hand when I needed it, who never judged me, who called just to hear my voice. And they wanted her erased, from my will, from my choices, from my life. That night, I stood in the middle of my room and looked straight into the ceiling camera. I wanted them to see my face. I wanted them to know I was done being afraid. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, but because I was redrawing the boundaries of my life, quietly, carefully. I knew one thing for sure. If I let emotion lead, I would lose. I couldn't let them know what I'd seen. I needed time. I needed proof. The next morning, I called Diane. "Can you meet me tonight?" I asked. "Anywhere quiet?" We met at a small diner tucked in an old neighborhood. Low lighting, few people, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I brought the USB I had just bought that morning. Inside were files I'd copied from Michael's laptop. Emails between him and a lawyer, the camera control panel, the draft of the will, and Chloe's handwritten note, "Remove Stephanie." Diane held the USB as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. "You know what hurts the most?" I said. "It's not being watched. It's being made invisible. It's being silenced." She nodded, eyes shimmering but steady. We built a plan, not a dramatic showdown, but a strategic, lawful path forward. Diane reviewed the documents and confirmed. Installing surveillance in private living spaces without consent was illegal. Drafting legal documents with false representations, like listing me as having already signed, could constitute fraud. I began contacting my banks directly, changed passwords, set security alerts, locked down access from anyone else. I reopened a private savings account and moved the remaining funds out of any joint arrangements. I backed up everything, screenshots of the cameras, the sticky note, photos of documents, daily journal entries. Every night, I wrote down exact conversations, expressions, and timings. Then I called Stephanie. Her voice cracked as I told her everything. "Mom," she said, "they told me you didn't want me involved anymore, that you were trying to simplify your estate." I smiled, not bitterly, just sadly. "It's not your fault," I said. "They're writing a story about my life without letting me hold the pen." Stephanie didn't hesitate. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Whether it's legal action or cutting them off, I won't let you do this alone." And just like that, a warmth returned to my chest. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was focused. 3 days later, I was ready. I spent my mornings reviewing every last detail. I sorted the evidence, printed each photo, email excerpt, camera feed screenshot, every draft with handwritten notes. I taped a blank sheet to my bedroom wall and began mapping it all out. The day Michael gave me the first documents, the moment I discovered the cameras, the night I overheard his phone call, the cafe meeting with Diane, Stephanie's promise. I stood back and looked at the chart. There it was, the whole picture they thought I'd never see. And I knew it was time to take back my voice. I called Diane, I called Stephanie. We agreed to meet in the living room the next day. Michael and Chloe would be there, and this time I would not be silent. That afternoon, I sat at the head of the living room table. No tea, no cookies, no small talk. Just silence, heavy and electric. To my left was Diane, composed, firm, with a leather folder resting on her lap. To my right, Stephanie, my daughter, with teary eyes but unwavering resolve. Michael and Chloe walked in. Their faces stiffened the moment they saw us waiting, like a courtroom in session. Michael asked, "What's going on, Mom?" I pointed to the file folder on the table. "Sit down." They sat. No one spoke. I opened the folder. On top were still images printed from the home surveillance system, photos showing the hallway outside my room, my kitchenette, and the camera hidden in the eaves outside. I slid the photos toward Michael. "Care to explain?" Diane said, her voice sharp. "Surveillance in private living quarters without consent is illegal." Michael's face turned pale. Chloe lowered her eyes. I turned the page. Next, printed emails between Michael and an outside attorney. Lines highlighted: adjust trust terms to bypass final signature, remove financial access, emergency action if she gets suspicious. I didn't shout. I didn't tremble. I looked straight at my son. "Why?" I asked. Michael stammered. "Mom, you're misunderstanding. We were just trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I said. "By spying on me day and night?" By drafting a will behind my back with the words "Remove Stephanie." By stripping my financial and medical authority while I'm still alive, still lucid. Stephanie's voice was quiet but cutting. You thought she wouldn't notice? That she didn't matter enough to ask? Or is it that you just stopped seeing her at all? Chloe finally spoke, tension in her voice. It's not that simple. We just thought, if we let you keep control of everything, it'd be too messy. And you don't really have anyone else, do you? That was it. I stood. No one else? I said, my voice steady. You think I'm what? Some shadow? A walking wallet? I turned to Chloe, eyes locked. I don't need pity. I need respect. Diane stepped in. If pursued legally, these actions may carry serious civil and even criminal consequences. Michael didn't respond. He looked small, shrinking. This was the boy I once watched graduate. Now a man who thought his mother wouldn't fight back. I took a deep breath. I'm not here today to apologize or to mend things. I'm here to reclaim what's mine, my name, my rights, my dignity. I looked at Stephanie. She gripped my hand. Thank you, I whispered, for standing with me. Then I turned to Michael and Chloe, two people who once thought they could rewrite my life, with a forged signature and a locked hallway door. This story, I said, is no longer yours to tell. I'll be the one writing the ending now. After that afternoon, the house became strangely quiet. No one mentioned what had happened, no apologies, no confrontations, just a heavy stillness, like the walls themselves were bracing for the inevitable. But for me, the storm had passed, and I was still standing. That night, I packed a small suitcase. Not much, just a few clothes, my journal, an old photo of Arthur and me, and the pale blue teapot Chloe once gave me when I first moved in. The first gift, and the last time she treated me like a person. I didn't pack in a rush. I didn't cry. I just did what needed to be done. Not to leave quietly, but to walk forward, with my voice intact. The next morning, I sent Michael a message. I'll be moving out today. Thank you for showing me what I needed to see. No reply. Stephanie arrived at 10 a.m. to pick me up. She hugged me tightly at the door. No words were needed. Sometimes, silence is the most sacred language of love. I looked back at the house one last time, the place once called safe, the place I thought would bring me home again. I didn't feel bitterness, but I would never forget. I moved into a small apartment near downtown, bright, private, peaceful. Stephanie helped me choose it. Diane handled the legal work. The neighbors greeted me with soft hellos. Everything was simple and real. That first night in my new home, I brewed a pot of tea, played soft music, lit a small candle on the table. No one was watching me, no cameras, no pressure to pretend I was okay. I sat in an old armchair, staring out the window, where the sunlight fell gently into my teacup. I thought about the months behind me, about how I'd let the silence go on too long, about how the fear of losing family made me surrender my freedom. But not anymore. I had left, not because I lost, but because I had won, by choosing myself. I set my phone aside, no longer waiting to see who would call or apologize. I didn't need to hear their guilt or their anger. I had drawn the line. I had rewritten the next chapter of my life. That night, I opened the notebook I had used to document everything. I turned to the last page, and for the first time, I wrote something that wasn't evidence. I am back, and this time I don't need anyone's permission. I didn't expect to laugh this much, just weeks after walking away. Not the polite kind of laugh you give to fill space, but real laughter, from the chest, from the gut, from a place I thought I'd lost. My apartment is nothing fancy: one bedroom, a living room, a small balcony just big enough for 2 orchids and a wooden chair. But every morning the sunlight floods the kitchen, and I sit there brewing tea, turning on my old radio, writing a few lines in my journal. No one's watching me. No one's handing me papers. No one's making me feel invisible. I've started building what I call small rituals. Brewing tea in a porcelain pot, never paper cups. Writing down 3 things I'm grateful for. Watering my plants to music because I like imagining that flowers feel things too. Stephanie stops by nearly every day. She brings fresh bread, tells me stories from work. Some days she just comes over to hug me for a few minutes. One afternoon, she put her hand on my cheek and said, "Mom, do you know your eyes have light in them again?" I looked at her, then nodded. I knew. I was no longer the woman sitting in the dark, wondering what her son was planning behind closed doors. I was no longer the shadow living on the ground floor of someone else's house. I had chosen to walk away, and in doing so, I didn't just reclaim space, I reclaimed myself. Diane still calls now and then, checking in like a big sister. Once she told me, "Lillian, you may not know this, but women like you, when they stand up, they don't just save themselves. They light a path for others still afraid to speak." I had been silent for a long time, but now I didn't need to scream to be heard. I just needed to live truthfully. Day by day, sometimes I still dream of Arthur. In the dream, he doesn't say much. He just sits beside me, hand on my shoulder, like he sees me, really sees me again. I wake up, I don't cry, I smile. I know he'd be proud. A friend once told me, "Freedom isn't the absence of barriers. It's having the courage to walk away from what suffocates you." I've done that, and I'm never going back. Every morning I step out onto my small balcony, cup of tea in hand, watching sunlight spill over my 2 purple orchids. Just an ordinary day. No shouting, no surveillance, no walking on eggshells. A day that is mine. Sometimes I think back. If I had signed that paper Michael handed me, I might have disappeared. Not physically, but I would have vanished from the authority over my own life. The worst kind of disappearance is when you're still breathing, still eating, still sitting in a house, but you're no longer allowed to choose. I didn't let that happen, not because I'm braver than anyone else, but because I had been hurt enough to finally say, "No more." I used to think, if I stay quiet, they'll love me. But no, my silence only taught them that I had nothing worth hearing. I used to think, if I compromise a little, the family will stay peaceful. But no, my compromise was mistaken for compliance. I used to think, I'm old now, as long as I'm not a burden, that's enough. But no, being old doesn't mean being invisible. Not being a burden doesn't mean I deserve to be mistreated. And I was wrong when I thought I needed permission to stand up. I don't believe that anymore. I don't need to raise my voice to be heard. I don't need to sacrifice everything just to hold on to one-sided affection. I don't need anyone's approval to live, to choose, to say I matter. The last time Stephanie visited, she smiled and said, "Mom, you're like that orchid, thought to be withering, and then it bloomed when no one expected it." I smiled back. Maybe I'm not the orchid. Maybe I'm the wind, once trapped behind glass panes. And now that I'm free, I'm not returning to be the storm. I've become myself, quiet, steady, no longer asking. If you're reading this now, maybe you too have been treated as though your voice didn't matter. Maybe you've been backed into a corner, forced to choose between family and your own truth. I want you to know this. It is never too late to return, not to who you used to be, but to who you were before you were forgotten. And that person is still there, still waiting for you,